Welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make my pumpkin streusel muffins, gluten-free pumpkin streusel muffins. These are so delicious. You can actually use the same recipe, leave off the streusel, and they make fantastic cupcakes. So pretty much at the first sign of fall in New England and much of the United States at any rate, everyone starts thinking about pumpkin. Personally, I'm an apple before pumpkin person, but I know what everybody wants, so I'm going to give you pumpkin. So for today's recipe, we're going to be doing the pumpkin streusel muffins, and coming up in the next few weeks, there'll be lots of other gluten-free pumpkin recipes. So today's recipe is really easy. We can do this without a stand mixer. You don't need a stand mixer or anything. You can do it all by hand. We're gonna start off by taking our dry ingredients, which is our 1-to-1 gluten-free flour, and we're gonna put that into a bowl. To that, I'm going to add my spices, which I have pie spice, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger. And for pumpkin pie spice, you can make your own. I do have a recipe on my website, or you can just buy pre-made pie spice. We have some baking soda and a little bit of salt. And that's just it for our dry ingredients. So those are, you're gonna whisk them together really well. And this is just to evenly distribute all of our spices and our leavening, our baking soda. And we're gonna set that aside. In another bowl, I'm now going to mix up the streusel topping. So for that, I'm going to start again with some of my gluten-free 1-to-1 flour. Today I'm using Better Batter Original, which is one of my favorites. And if you're interested in trying it out, there is a link under the recipe with a 30% off coupon. You can use any 1-to-1 flour you like, though. I've made these many times with Cup for Cup, with Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1, King Arthur Measure for Measure. If you're in the UK, you can use Dove's Farm. In Canada, you can use President's Choice. Any gluten-free flour that is marked as a 1-to-1, which means it will contain xanthan gum or some sort of a binder. To the flour, I'm adding my sugar. Today I'm using maple sugar. You can use maple sugar, brown sugar, or coconut sugar, whichever you prefer. And we're just going to get that mixed together well and dump in my cinnamon. Again, mixing this all together. You will notice in this recipe, as with all of my recipes, the ingredients are all by weight. And again, this is for the accuracy of baking, especially with gluten-free baking. So the number one thing you can do to improve your baking results is to learn how to measure with a scale. Okay, so this for my streusel is just my flour, sugar, cinnamon. And to that, I'm going to add in some cubed up butter. For this part, you can use a fork. So I have my flour, sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of salt in here. And to that, I have my butter as well, and I'm going to take a fork and just cut it in. So you could do this with your hands. You could also do this with a pastry cutter, or you can just do it with a fork. And we're just making a streusel top. So we're just trying to get this to be a nice crumbly mix with pieces no bigger than the size of a pea. So you want to keep working it until your butter is no bigger than the size of a pea. I'm just going to keep working that. And if a lot of times I'll start this with a fork or a pastry cutter, but in the end I get my hands in there because it's the easiest way to really get it well mixed and to feel it and get the texture that I want. That's entirely up to you. Again, you can use a fork for the whole thing. And you want it to be a little bit clumpy. So again, that's why sometimes getting your hands in here is good, because you can squeeze it together. Because if you leave it too powdery, you won't get the nice little crunches of that streusel on top, which is one of the reasons everybody loves streusel on a muffin or a coffee cake so much, is it gives a little, besides giving that nice little sweetness to the top of it, it gives a little texture contrast. So now you can see I have my nice crumbly mixture, and I'm just going to set that aside. So now to my second bowl, I'm going to add, I guess technically it's my third bowl, but my second bowl for the main part of the recipe, I'm going to put my pumpkin right in here. So this is just canned pumpkin. You can make your own pumpkin puree by roasting pumpkins and then pureeing them. It's always best to roast them. If you were to boil them or cook them some other way, they're going to have too much moisture. You want it to be this texture like canned pumpkin, but canned pumpkin works fantastic. Also canned squash. So in some places you'll find canned squash, which is usually butternut squash. That also works in any recipe calling for canned pumpkin. To this, we're going to add our sugar. And again, today I'm using maple sugar. And we're just going to mix these together really well. So you can use your spatula, whatever, fork. And you just want to get them really well mixed. Make sure you don't have any big lumps of sugar. And once we have these mixed together, it's a really simple recipe. It's just mixing your wet together, mixing your dry together, really, and then folding it all in. So to that, I'm going to add my egg, which I like to beat it up a little bit first. You don't have to, but it makes it a lot easier to incorporate easily. Another thing to always remember with baking is all of your ingredients should be room temperature unless otherwise specified. And this does make a really big difference in the final outcome of your baked goods. Unless a recipe says that your butter or your milk or your eggs should be chilled, should be straight from the fridge, it always means room temperature. And usually taking things out of the refrigerator about an hour before you start your recipe is sufficient. That'll depend a little bit on the temperature of your house, but you don't have to go crazy about, exactly what temperature it is, but you're trying to get the chill off, because otherwise the coldness can affect your overall result, can affect the way your fats seize and set up. So to that, the last thing I have is my vanilla. So I added in my egg and then my oil. I'm using avocado oil today. You can use any oil you'd like, any neutral flavored oil, and all that means is an oil without any strong flavor to it. So now that I have my wet ingredients, like I said, this is a really simple recipe. I'm just gonna take my dry mix that I mixed up ahead, add this pumpkin. You'll notice in this recipe it's a lot of pumpkin, not a lot of fat, and not really a lot of sugar compared to how much pumpkin's in the recipe. So we're just gonna mix this together. Unlike regular gluten baking, we have a little bit of leeway and we don't have to worry quite as much about over mixing because we don't have to worry about overdeveloping gluten. In regular recipes, when they warn you about over mixing for things like cakes and muffins, it's because if you develop too much gluten, they get tough. We don't have that problem with gluten-free baking. They're not gonna be tough, so you can mix a little longer if you need to, just to make sure that there's no lumps of sugar or flour or anything. So once it's nice and smooth, we're just gonna set this aside to rest. And you wanna rest this for 30 minutes. You could get away with 20, I wouldn't go any less than that, and you can go longer if you need to, but 30 minutes is really just about right always for any of your gluten-free things like breads, quick breads, cakes. It's a really important step because it helps to combat the grittiness and that sandiness that you sometimes get as a texture from the gluten-free flours because they take a little bit longer to hydrate and absorb the liquids. So we want to give this time to do that. So I'm going to set it aside for 30 minutes and then we'll come back and put these together into the pan. Okay, so our 30 minutes have passed and it's up to you. If you want to cover this, you can. You don't have to, depending on, again, your house, if you have worried about flies or pets or anything else covered up with something, just drape a towel across it, but you can also just leave it. It's only 30 minutes. So it's been sitting. If you're using better batter, you can actually get away with resting a little bit less, a little bit shorter time with Better Batter Original, but I usually, just out of habit, rest everything for that 20 to 30 minutes. Again, usually 30. So now all we're gonna do is scoop them right into our muffin. And again, you could make these any size you want. You could do jumbos, you could do mini muffins. I'm doing a standard size muffin and I'm using these tulip muffin papers, which you can find on Amazon. I do have them on my list, but if you just want to look them up, they're called tulip papers. They come in all different colors. I kind of like them. They're pretty and they're really easy to peel open when you want to serve the muffins. So you're just going to divide this evenly. This recipe makes 12 normal, quote unquote, normal size muffins, and that's about 2 ounces of batter or so per muffin cup. You can just eyeball it. I usually use a scoop. When we get down to the end, it helps sometimes to use a spatula to get that last little bit out. You'd be surprised how much is left in your bowl when you think you've cleaned it. There's our last muffin. So now that I have them all in the pans, if you want to, you can look over it and check if you want them to be really even and make sure they look really even. And then the last step is the deliciousness. We're just gonna take the streusel, and again, as you go to put it on top, you can crumble it, kind of pinch it together a little bit more too, so you get some nice chunks, and you're just going to sprinkle the streusel on top. And it's okay if some goes down the sides, if your muffins weren't sitting completely flat and level in the pan, that's okay. It just adds to the texture variation by having some streusel kind of go inside them and around the edges. So you're just, again, dividing this evenly. If you don't like streusel, you don't have to use a streusel. You could just put some cinnamon sugar on top, or as I mentioned, you could leave them plain, and then they're delicious with cream cheese frosting. Makes it more of a cupcake. Although I always say that a cupcake before noon is a muffin. They're really the same thing. One has frosting, one doesn't. Sometimes muffins are a little less sweet, but in reality, a lot of times, they're just as sweet as a cupcake. So if it makes you feel better to call it a muffin, call it a muffin. And that's it. So I've evenly have my streusel on top of all of my muffins. These are just going to get popped into a 350-degree oven. I usually check them after 10 minutes with all of my recipes. If I about half the baking time, so 10, 12 minutes, I'll check on these, see how they're looking. Give them a turn if you need to, depending on your oven, and then continue baking for the rest of the baking time. I like to always bake when I can. If I'm only baking one pan of something, the ideal place is the middle rack in the middle of your oven. So I'm gonna go pop these oven and we'll come back and see what they look like when they're done. Okay, so our muffins have been cooking for just about 25 minutes total, and they are out of the oven. You can see they smell amazing. And I'm just gonna show you what they look like. You can see the streusel all over the top, and I'll peel this back so you can really, that's what I love about these papers. They peel back and kind of almost make a little plate for you to eat off of. These are super hot, so they're gonna be kind of steamy in the inside when I break them open. But you can see that nice streusel top, and then it has this nice, tender, beautiful cakey crumb on the inside. So, a fall favorite. I hope they become a fall favorite in your house. The recipe is linked below, as are my Amazon, which has all of my favorite flours and gluten-free baking tools. There's also a link to my Facebook group. So if you bake this recipe or any other recipe of mine, you have questions, you want to show everybody how it came out, go ahead and join the Facebook group. We're always in there helping to troubleshoot and answer everyone's questions about all these recipes. See you next time.